Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to our virtual executive trade course. This is week 2 of the course. First of all, let me thank you for being with us last week, week 1, when we covered international trade in times of COVID. I hope you enjoyed that week and you enjoyed the pre-recorded video with presentations. We thank you also for questions, comments and questions that we received. We have some good news. We have just received the answers from our trainers, and later today we will be sending those responses back to you, as well as we will also prepare a compilation, anonymized compilation for all of you. We will post it in the Google Drive, and also we will send it to you with an email with an evaluation of week 1. So that will complete our week 1, and we will be able to move on. So we already thank you in advance for taking the time and filling out the evaluation form that will be sent to you hopefully later on today, and we will attach the compilation of those questions to that email. Well, welcome to week 2 of the course, and I must say we are very lucky because this week is a special week at the WTO, and especially with respect to trade facilitation agreement. It is indeed today, to the day, that we have a 5th anniversary of entering into force of the trade facilitation agreement. So it worked out very well in the program that we can both celebrate and also learn more about it, about what it is and what is the state of play and current implementation information regarding this agreement. And with us, we have 2 colleagues from the Market Access Division, Ms. Dolores Halloran, Economic Affairs Officer, and Ms. Helen Chang, Project Officer, who will be our main trainers in this module. We reserved for today, for Tuesday, 2 hours from 9:30 to 11:30. And you are also aware that there will be a live Q&A question on Friday from 14 to 16 hours Geneva time. That's 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Geneva time on Friday. We also reserve the time for any follow-up questions from what you were here today, and also for the exercise that has been foreseen for you. And we have sent it along with all of our materials by email last week, as well as we have posted it on the Google Drive. I would like to, of course, encourage you to go to the Google Drive to make sure that you have good access. And should you experience any difficulty in accessing any of the materials, please also let us know. I believe Dolores and Helen will have enough time to take some substantive questions at the very end of the session. That's why we have reserved the 2 hours to make sure that we have that sufficient time. I hope you have great sessions on TFA today, Tuesday, and on Friday. And without further ado, I give the floor to Dolores and Helen, and I wish you a wonderful session and good module 2 on the TFA, the first 5 years of the agreement. So Dolores and Helen, welcome to our course, and the floor is yours. In fact, the whole week is yours. So all the best to you all.
Thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you very much to all your team for all your very kind assistance in organizing this course and for giving us the opportunity to share with the participants from around the world about the first 5 years of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. And as you say, it just so happens that we're marking the anniversary of its entry into force as of today. Myself and Helen both work on trade facilitation, and we work in the Market Access Division, We have been working on TFA for a number of years, and I hope that we're able to share with you some information that may be of interest to you. Some of you may already be involved in the TFA agreement, and if so, we certainly welcome your input in the discussion part. For some of you, maybe this will be something new for you or something with which you're less familiar, so we certainly hope that you get something from it. The way Helen and I have considered doing this morning's presentation is that both of us will present different segments. First of all, let me introduce Helen, who is our trainer, if you like. And so the way we have organized it is Helen is going to present the first segment of this morning, which will be an overview of the agreement. Then I will talk a bit about the current status of implementation 5 years on. And I'll just share with you the outcome of the first review that has been carried out of the TFA, which took place last year. And I believe that will be of interest. It will give you a sense of where the Trade Facilitation Committee will be focusing its work in the coming years. As Alicia said, we're more than happy to answer any questions, to take on board any of your comments this morning. If possible, as Alicia said, we would take up those questions at the end of the session. So if you have some questions to put into chat, or if you just like to raise them at the end, please feel free to do so. And so without further ado, I'll hand you over to Helen and for the first session this morning, which is an overview of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. Thank you very much. And Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Dolores, and good morning to Geneva, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening if you're joining us from other parts of the world. Before I start the presentation, I wanted to know if you'd be so kind to share with me, with Dolores as well, if you have any prior engagements with the TFA. For example, if through the chat box you could let us know whether you work in implementing the TFA, whether you are part of the National Trade Facilitation Committee, for example, just so you know that we can perhaps either apologize to those of you who already know about the TFA, about how much we're going to speak about it today, but hopefully also share with you some interesting insights. Or if you'd like to share with us, if you're from customs, from agriculture, it would be really helpful if you could let us know through the chat. So the chat is open if you'd like to, in the next minute or so, let us know if you have any prior engagement. And if you don't, just say, I don't know anything about the TFA. I don't work with the TFA. So I'll leave it open.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. This is Stephen, Uganda.
Hi, good morning, Stephen.
Good morning. It's my pleasure that I'm part of the team that is attending this course this time round. I am happy to inform you that in particularly last intake I was in Geneva in 2020 when COVID came in to disrupt us the last week of our training. But I found it very important because I wanted to get a recap, one, on the issue mainly COVID-19 pandemic effects, and then if there's anything that have changed. But particularly as a person, I'm part of the National Trade Committee in our capital, and we are moving on, I think, moving on well, no special on
Stephen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's a bit hard to hear you. I'm not sure if I'm seeing well that your microphone is on top. If you could probably lower it down. Or I see that on your headset, it's on top. So if you could perhaps move it down towards your mouth or.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
I think that's better now. You
It's
are now
better.
hearing?
I can hear you.
So particularly for me, I was part of the team on 2020 intake that were physically attending this course in Geneva. Although we got affected with last week of the training because of COVID pandemic. So I am not very new in this. And then too, in my capital, I am part of the national team on trade facilitation agreement.
Thank you, Stephen. That was very nice to hear. And I see from the chat, for example, people who are not engaged with the TFA, chairs from the Technical National Trade Facilitation Committee, and follow up with implementation, such as Stephen as well. Trade Ministry sits at the NTFC, member of the Trade Facilitation Committee, no experience, no engagement, engaged in NTFC work, part of the TPR under the Trade Facilitation Committee. So I see that we have a mix, and we'll try to cater to all audiences here to give you a bit of an overview of the TFA for those of you who don't know it. And we'll try to provide some insights for those of you who already work with the TFA. So thank you all for sharing through the chat. It's really nice to hear from you and to interact with you like this. So without further ado, let's get started. So basically, the TFA is aimed at simplifying, modernizing, and harmonizing import, export, and transit processes. And it does so through rules that improve the movement, the release, and the clearance of goods, including goods in transit. And it also contains rules to improve customs cooperation. Now, if you look at this, it would appear that trade facilitation is an agreement that is specifically addressed to customs, but as some of you might have already experienced, really this is an agreement whose implementation is or different actors participate in the implementation of the TFA, such as the different agencies that participate in the trade process. So we have agriculture, we have health ministries, we have trade ministries, of course, customs, but there are also many other parties involved. So not to confuse the language with an exclusively customs targeted agreement. So also, a simple framework to try to understand what the TFA does and how it does it is to think about the trading process before the border, when the goods are in transit, and when the goods reach the border. So this is just a conceptual framework to try to understand the agreement. Now, if you think about what a trader may face before the border, one of the struggles might be finding accurate information. I think it's not uncommon for traders to ask themselves, like, what is their tariff classification? What is the customs duty that applies? Whether there is a preference and an associated rule of origin, and consequently any sanitary regulations or technical regulations that the product must comply with. So that is something that it's fairly common, and it's a struggle that is also perhaps bigger felt on SMEs that do not have, dedicated legal teams to find, or dedicated trade departments to find this kind of information. So that might be difficult. Now, try multiplying that to different territories, different WTO members, in case you want to diversify your export destinations. I remember the case of a chocolate factory that had different assembly lines for the same product, just depending on which market they were going to export the final good. And that, it represents cost for a producer. So something that is legal, you have to bear in mind that it also represents practical aspects. So if you don't have information, and if you have plenty of markets that you want to address, another difficulty that might be present is, who do you talk to in case you have doubts? I don't know what the information is. I don't know the tariff. I don't know where to find it. I don't know the rule of origin. Where do I find the text of the FTA? Where is this regulation? So there are no contact points. Sometimes traders are also ping-ponged, between agencies trying to find information, and this is not always easy. Something else that traders might face is that, they don't have to deal with one agency exclusively in the trading process. For example, it might be that they present everything to customs, but then customs might say, we need this from the health ministry, we need this authorization, or the trade ministry must provide you a license for a quota, for example, etc. So a trader is required to deal with many agencies, and sometimes present either the same information or different information, both of which generate costs to trade. And one recurring topic that you will hear across the 3 stages of the trading process is a lack of coordination. Now, of course, being in a ministry, being inside a government agency, you don't per se do this on purpose. Like, it's very difficult to keep everyone, up to date with what's going on. It's not always easy. People have different agendas, different priorities, etc. So, lack of coordination, it might be something that we hear from traders, but coordination is difficult on the inside. It's absolutely difficult. So what does the TFA do to try to address some of these situations? So, for example, the TFA requires that members notify to the committee the places where they have published trade information. And some of this information is also to be published on the internet to make it more accessible. The TFA also requires the establishment of an enquiry point, somewhere where traders can address their enquiries, and their contact points are notified to the committee as well. And as Dolores will show you later, and as we will go through our exercise later in the day, you will see that all of this information is made public through the TFA database website. And so if you wanted to know the enquiry point of XYZ country member of the WTO, you can go to this database and find out. And then on the aspect of coordination, the TFA mandates the establishment of a single window. So that's a one-stop shop where there is only one place where the trader has to go to present all their forms to comply with all requirements for the trading process. And then, for example, another modality in which the TFA can help address some of the coordination issues is that agencies accept copies of documents And so this makes it easier for the trader to present, one original, and then agencies can share copies and, request the original from perhaps the agency that has it at the time. But for speeding up the processing of the information, you can accept copies and hopefully electronically if possible. And then the TFA also provides some basis for the private sector to participate in the creation of laws that will eventually affect them in the trading process. So the TFA provides grounds for the private sector to have the opportunity to comment on these regulations. And as it might be your experience in your national trade facilitation committees, having the private sector on board in the capacity that you determine appropriate could be also a way to coordinate with them and with other agencies. So this is how the TFA helps address difficulties before the border. Then we go to the stage of transit. So perhaps in some situations, a shipment will not arrive directly from territory A to territory B, but it may have to go through territory C or D to get to its final destination. And the rationale here is, if the shipment is not going to stay in the transit countries, why might there be so many regulations? And here the difficulties might be, excessive fees and charges just to transit. And transit, you have to consider that it's something that, it's something that the shipment has to do. It has no other option but to transit to that country to reach its final destination. So excessive fees and charges might condition to a certain extent de facto that transit operation, and the same with excessive documentation. Again, the issue of coordination. It might be that the agencies at different border points have not shared information, or it can be also the case that authorities at the border are not sharing information with authorities inside the border who are carrying out controls. So this might pose certain difficulties for traders. Also, when shipments transit certain territories, it might be that a guarantee is required, for example, to make sure that, should the shipment, for whatever reason, stay in the country, it covers tariffs or any other charge from customs, that the guarantee covers that. But it might be also that the guarantee is excessive, or it takes a lot of time to process it. And finally, but not exhaustively, of course, another difficulty might be that shipments might be required to transit to a territory with a convoy. For example, the police, I would presume, in case it's considered high risk. So again, going back to the rationale and to wrap this up, if the shipment is not going to stay in that country, why so many difficulties? But at the same time, if you put yourself in the position of the authorities, you have to make sure that everything is in place just in case something were to happen with that shipment that's not supposed to stay in that territory. So how can the TFA help in this regard? So the TFA contains disciplines. It means it contains rules on excessive formalities and controls that perhaps they are only as necessary. It contains disciplines on guarantees and customs escorts, these convoys. So, there are rules now that apply to them. They cannot necessarily be always applied, but only in certain circumstances. One requirement that the TFA does eliminate is the need for conformity assessments with technical regulation, which is under the scope of the technical barriers to trade agreement. So for example, this is most commonly, let's say, labeling requirements, that the bottle contains, the nutrition facts translated into the domestic language. And again, the rationale is, if this is not going to stay here, why should I comply with that? And also note that the TFA provides for an exception to the TBT agreement, the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, but not so the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Because even though the shipments might be in transit, they may pose sanitary risks. So, the TFA does not provide for that. So this is basically when a shipment is in transit. Also, this is not exhaustive, right? This is just an overview of what the TFA does. And then finally, if you put yourself at the border, some of the difficulties that might be present for traders, and when I'm looking at the slides now that I'm thinking about it, you hear things from traders, right? You hear that some things might be difficult, but then government agencies, you are only trying to do your job, right? You're only trying to, make sure that whatever, goes into your territory has complied with the rules. So that is completely understandable. And the TFA is a balance of those two interests. So for example, if at the border, traders might have difficulties with, perhaps transparency. They don't know what the exact procedure might be. Or they consider that the time to process an application or a form is too long, it's inefficient, or there might be too many formalities to comply with. That can be addressed, for example, through information technology. But IT solutions are not necessarily as used as they could be, perhaps for budgetary constraints, etc. But some of these things might be present at the border. And once again, the issue of cooperation and coordination. And there is another layer to this here, that it might not be only coordination with domestic agencies, but also with border agencies that, coordination is needed. So the TFA provides a basis to coordinate, again, with agency, provides for mechanisms. And one way that you can think about the TFA is something that provides you with a basis. You can do whatever you want, from that basis up, but the TFA provides you with the building blocks to do that. It also provides for the use of technical solutions, IT solutions in certain circumstances, for example, electronic payment, or the possibility of lodging documentation with customs prior to the arrival of the goods to the border. Also, the TFA, provides for the use of risk management techniques that would allow you to reduce the number of physical inspections and just target them to those shipments that are truly, with a risk, with a high risk profile. And also, just to speed up the release and clearance of goods, there are procedures available in the TFA that members must put in place to, for example, release the goods before the final determination. And that can be aided by, for example, post-clearance audits. And that is basically, the disciplines of the TFA, the, substantive disciplines. That's what the TFA, prompts member to do and obliges members to do in certain cases. Now, the TFA is innovative in many respects. One of which is that this is an agreement that states that members are only developing, and LDC members are only required to implement if they have the capacity to do so. So this is the first agreement that links implementation to capacity. So developing members and LDCs are not required to implement if they do not have the technical assistance, the necessary capacity to implement these provisions. And also, developing members and LDCs can self-designate when they will implement certain provisions. And these time periods are not negotiated. They are not up for discussion with other members. They are completely sovereign and self-designated, but notified to the committee. So just a refresher, for those of you who already know, and for those of you who are new, basically the system of the TFA in terms of special and differential treatment, or one of its aspects, works like this. You take every measure, every substantive measure from section 1 of the agreement, and then you will categorize it either in A, B, or C, and you notify this to the committee. So what is category A? Category A are measures that a member will implement at entry into force. That is immediately. Now, category B measures are those that a member will need more time to implement, 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. So they notify, I will implement this measure by X date in the future. And category C measures are those that not only need additional time, but also need technical assistance and capacity building mechanisms from the donor community. And here, not only do you designate something, a provision as a category C provision, but you also state what are the things that you require to implement. This is, I believe, my last slide, but I just wanted to leave you with other flexibilities provided for in section 2 of the agreement. And I wanted to focus on 2 of them: the early warning mechanism and the shifting between categories B and C, because, in the past 5 years, we have seen that those are the 2, let's say, flexibilities or modalities that members are using the most, without prejudice of them using any other in the future, of course. So the early warning mechanism, how does it work? Basically, if a developing member or LDC that notified a provision in categories B or C, and it determines that it will not be able to implement that provision by the definitive date that it told the committee that it would, then that member has to notify the committee that it won't be able to do so. And the trick here, and Dolores will emphasize this later for you, is when to notify the committee. So developing countries must notify the committee 120 days before the expiration of that implementation date, and LDCs must do so 90 days before the expiration of that definitive implementation date. So that is the trick to using the early warning mechanism, or at least that has been something that members have discussed exhaustively in the committee. So this flexibility is present. You can let the committee know that you will not do this by X date, but you will do this by another date, but you have to let the committee know. And then lastly, members also have the possibility of, shifting and saying, I thought that I did not need technical assistance for this. I notified it as a category B, but turns out that I might need technical assistance. I was a bit too ambitious and I might need. So I'm going to shift this to category C, and here are the technical assistance needs that I require to implement. Now, what's interesting, and again, Dolores will expand on this later, is that we've seen more of the opposite. Members that notified something or a provision in category B are rather shifting it to category B and letting the committee know that they will be able to implement a provision without technical assistance. So that's where I would leave it. Of course, any questions are welcome towards the end of the session. And I give it over to you, Dolores.
Great. I beg your pardon. Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you for that overview. And I hope that was, we both hope that that was of interest to you. As Helen said, a refresher for those of you who are involved or familiar with it, and hopefully an introduction to those of you who are new. So I am going to look at how the implementation of the agreement has actually evolved over the first 5 years. I'm looking, my focus on this session is on section 2, because if we were looking at an agreement, let's say up to the structure of the TFA agreement, members would be implementing the agreement as of its entry into force, and up to now in most agreements, the flexibility for developing countries, least developed countries, has been a transition period, a fixed transition period of a number of years. And therefore, these agreements, it would be clear and transparent as to when all the members would be implementing the agreement. It would be a fixed timeline. However, and those of you working on your national committees are very familiar with these flexibilities, plus the work, I suppose, really, that they imply in order to adhere to them. So Helen has pointed out that members self-designate when they are going to implement the agreement, right down to they decide when they can implement each provision. And within a provision, when there are sub-provisions, they can also indicate when they will implement each of those subdivisions. So there is extensive flexibility just with that alone. So the requirement, when it comes, therefore, to this extensive flexibilities, as you can imagine, one of the aspects for members would be keeping track of the evolution of the implementation of the agreement. Basically, what member is implementing which provision at a point in time. In order to be able to assess right now, and I'll show you in the next slide or two, where exactly we are in terms of the implementation of the TFA right now. So this is basically the whole purpose of the categorization, the A, Bs and Cs, the flexibilities, the shifting, the extension. Each of these require notifications. And again, those of you in the committees working on it know exactly the number of notifications that are required. It's an ongoing, it has been an ongoing process. So members have first to notify how they are categorizing the provisions in the agreement. They need to notify that. They need to notify an indicative date. That is, because they have to notify this prior to the entry into force of the agreement, obviously you are making your best guess, so to speak. They're taking on board all the information you have at that point in time, your resources. You think, okay, Article 1 about transparency, we will be in a position to implement that in 2 years' time. So you give your first indicative date. But as you then come to the deadline, there's a deadline for notifying that indicative date. Now, when I talk about deadlines, as you can imagine, all of these are in the past. So you had to notify your indicative date first. You had, after a period of time, you were required to notify the definitive date. So either you confirmed what you had given as your best guesstimate, or with time you've seen that you need to change those. You need to notify when it comes to those provisions that you have put into your C category. You are required to notify the technical assistance you will require in order to do that. And it continues to have a number of notifications, which I will just show very quickly on a slide. So all of that is to say that there is a dependency on members adhering to these notification requirements in order to give us a picture of the implementation progress of the TFA at any point in time. So with that, let me show you today's situation. With regard to the ratification of the agreement, you can see that we're at almost a 94% rate of ratification. And you can see that there are 9 members yet to ratify. The agreement entered into force when it did 5 years ago, at the point that 3/4 of the membership, no, I beg your pardon, 2/3 of the membership had ratified the agreement. So with that, looking at the next slide, right now today, we can see that we have a rate of implementation of the commitments made by members. That is to say, according to the notifications made by members, they have indicated that as of today, they have implemented provisions such that if these commitments are implemented, they will indicate that globally, the rate of implementation of the agreement today is just under 73%. You will see that for developing members, it's at just under 74%. And you will notice there that there is a lag between the rate of implementation of developing members and LDCs. You can see that LDCs are at a rate of implementation of 41%. Now, the next slide will, I think, give us a bigger picture, because this slide shows where we are today, but also the timeline for full implementation of the agreement. Now, you will see that globally, and actually across all 3, there is a higher percentage of provisions still to be implemented through Category C. And this explains the lag to a certain degree in the case of least developed countries. They would have more of their provisions in C as they require more technical assistance. And as part of that, they have also indicated that they need this amount of time in order to achieve that technical assistance and in order to implement the agreement. So this gives you more of an overall picture. You can see there, according to the color breakdown, those provisions in A that have been implemented as of February 2017. You can see already in developing members that there's quite an amount of provisions were in A and a smaller amount in B, and so far for developing members, a smaller amount in C. But this gives us a picture of where we're going as of today. Sorry, Helen, if we move on, thanks a million. So this is what I was mentioning earlier. So it just gives you a visual of the explanations that I was giving. Now, as of today, we are almost, you'll see from the heading there, the timeline is from 2017 to 2022. This year, particularly in August of this year, we will have reached the end of the road with regard to all notification requirements with regard to how members are going to implement the TFA. So we've gone past the deadlines for categorization, for the indicative dates, the deadline for members to notify their TA needs for their category Cs, the deadline for confirming their definitive dates. And now we're at a stage where the final deadline is in August of this year. LDCs are required to notify their definitive dates. You will see that LDCs have received additional information all along the lines for all the definitive dates. So we are at a stage where the TA arrangements and the progress made are those notifications that are still required across the board and that are very important right now, and you will see why in the next slides. So with regard to all the notifications so far, you will see from this slide that the majority of notifications have been received, the vast majority, if you like. You'll see the total notifications received from 90 developing members and 35 least developed members. So you'll see that there are very, very few members that actually have some outstanding notifications. So I think this is a pretty good picture. From what I understand, during the notifications, or during the negotiations, there was a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, on Section 2. And in fact, the negotiations on Section 2 would have taken the longest time. Again, very understandable. This is a new approach. Members were trying to figure out how to balance the requirements of all the members across the board. And part of those discussions, or part of something that was, floating around that, was a concern or some thinking about if there were very extensive flexibilities, would all members still be encouraged to move ahead with the implementation of the agreement? Would the provision of so many flexibilities have an impact in the sense that it could delay the implementation depending on the extent to which the requirements to implement those flexibilities, which are actually the notifications, would these obligations be adhered to? And this picture shows that absolutely, yes, they have been adhered to. And so if we move to the next slide, this is an important slide right now. We have seen where we are in terms of today's rate of implementation. And we saw from the slide showing the future roadmap for implementation that there are a significant number of provisions for, across a significant number of members that are in category C and that are to be implemented in the future. Now, as we said, as part of the notifications, as part of the implementation of the flexibility by members, there are requirements to notify technical assistance needs. And for the simple reason that it's important for donor members, for other donors, be it international organizations, aid agencies, etc., it is important for them to know what the requirements are so that they can look at their own budget priorities, they can look at their own budgets with regard to the assisting members with implementing the TFA. Because back in the day, and you already may be familiar with this, and it makes sense, the greater the rate of implementation of the TFA, the greater the benefit to everybody. And full implementation of the TFA related or indicated that there would be a greater benefit, increased trade, lower cost, increased well-being across the board. And that sector of members that statistics indicate would benefit most were the least developed countries. So in order to allow this to happen, the technical assistance is very important. And as Helen has said in her presentation, with regard to LDCs, with regard to their implementation of Category C provisions, LDCs are only required to implement their Category C provisions when they believe that they have sufficient technical assistance and have received sufficient capacity building support to be able to do so. So the provision and access to TA is extremely important. So those numbers tell their story. 95 members have notified their Category C designations. Of those, 88 have notified the TA requirements in order to implement the agreement in their countries. But we dropped down to 17 members that have notified the arrangements they have entered into with donors to secure technical assistance for TFA implementation and have notified the progress that they have made in securing technical assistance. Now, that poses a problem, and this is something that the committee has been focusing on more and more, because the problem is without this transparency, without this availability of information, it's harder for donors, it's harder for members to identify the gaps in the TA, where the needs are, in which countries, and how they can be addressed. Because if you think about it, there are donor members, donor organizations in every country, and they can be in a situation to perhaps extend the assistance they're giving to TFA implementation requirements, or to introduce a budget line for that. So, especially for those of you involved in the TFA, and even more specifically, for those of you engaged with your national trade facilitation committees, it would be very, very useful, more than that, sort of necessary, if you're in a position to make this notification. Now, of course, this can be a challenging one. There are questions, you know, in the committee, why is there this lag with the notification of the TA arrangements and progress? Because obviously this is to the benefit of the country seeking TA. And so that is a question, and it would be interesting to hear from yourselves as to your thoughts on why that might be. I know, obviously, one of the issues, one of the big issues for countries would be a resource issue. You know, to sit down and who is the agency, the person who will actually have to coordinate, try to reach out, try to find what aid is in the country, who has been reached out to, and what kind of progress has been made. And perhaps there may be need for assistance to notify, to make this notification of assistance arrangements and progress. So moving on, having given that, that sense of one of the important aspects of today's implementation, you'll see the slide, we're simply emphasizing this is where we're at in terms of required notifications. And this is an important point in the roadmap of TFA implementation to move towards greater and ultimately, of course, full implementation of the agreement. The next slide is showing us here. Now, this is the development, as you can imagine, 5 years in, with having reached all the notifications bar the LDC definitive dates, but we already have their indicative dates. Obviously, 5 years in, you know, for me, it makes total sense that the flexibility of shifting of categories, it's for me a natural development because members are in the process of implementing. Many of them already have passed their category B implementation dates. A number of members have already, and we saw that from the slide, the number of members have passed the implementation date for their category C commitments. So naturally, as they're working towards implementing the TFA, they are finding if they need more time, they're finding that in fact they've made greater progress than anticipated and are able to implement the provision without TA, or in some cases they have discovered that in fact, those provisions for which they thought they just needed a transition period, it turns out that in fact technical assistance is needed. And alongside the technical assistance, it could make sense that that would also require an extended implementation time because you have to build in the time it's going to take to identify, to reach out and secure the technical assistance required to implement a C. So looking at this graph, you'll see the point that Helen made earlier. There may be an expectation, and this is going back to the thinking in the committee during the time of the negotiations, there may have been a sense that the flexibility of this shifting would be used to a greater extent for shifting provisions out of B into C. And indeed, that has happened. We can see that overall 17 members have done so, and you can see the breakdown between developing members and LDCs. But you will also see there that in fact, there's a greater number of members have shifted provisions from C to B. And this is obviously a very positive story. It's very positive news because it indicates in some members, for some provisions, they've actually accelerated their implementation of the TFA. Now, if we move to the next slide, in fact, if I could just, from a previous, I'm just trying to remember, and I don't know if I can, the number of measures. Yeah, we didn't have that. I had it because obviously the important part is not just the number of members that shifted, but also what number of measures that this referred to. Now, if you bear with me, I have my notes here. It's not that it's extremely important, but yeah, the shifting, the shifting by measure. So in fact, for the measures shifted from B to C overall, from the 17 countries that shifted, this covered 38 provisions. And for the 20 countries overall who shifted from C back into B, that actually covered 57 measures. And the 5 countries that shifted, the 5 members that shifted from B to C with extended dates, that actually covered 11 measures. So that's just to give you a fuller picture without, boring you to death too much, but it just gives you a context of the number of members and the extent of accelerated, in some cases, implementation of the TFA. If we move on, then the next flexibility that has been used the most, as Helen has said, is the request for extension of implementation dates. And this is the early warning mechanism under Article 17. Now, Helen has emphasized that there is the flexibility to use this early warning mechanism to get an extended implementation period. But there is this requirement that there is a deadline by which these requests need to be made. And they will vary, obviously, depending on each member's implementation date, but the deadline stays the same. At least 120 days prior to the implementation, the original implementation date for developing countries, and at least 90 days for least developed countries. Now, this slide here, this graphic is showing us that 17 members requested and were granted an extended implementation date. 2 requests from members are pending. Now, the pending simply refers to notifications that have been received in between committee meetings. Our last committee meeting was back in October. Since October, there have been 2 notifications of requests for extension. The committee's next meeting is in April, and at the April meeting, these requests will be considered. So that's the only reason they're pending. And you will see here that 6 members had their requests, a consensus was not reached on granting this request for the sole reason that the requests were not made within the 120 days and the 90 days period. In some cases, the requests were made on the actual original implementation date. And so last year, as Helen has said, this situation, because we're now entering into a period where there are more requests for use of the flexibilities of shifting of categories, and particularly of requesting extensions. These were coming in from the end of 2020 and into 2021. And it became an issue in the committee meetings, because this request would come in. It did not meet the deadline requirement. In the committee, there's a lot of goodwill towards supporting all members to implement the TFA. Obviously, it's for everyone's benefit to do so. So there was a differing of opinions within the committee as to whether or not such requests could be accepted. Now, one of the elements that sort of fed into this discussion, or the reason for the discussion, is under this request for extension, according to the agreement, it goes in the process that there is the deadline, you make your request within this deadline, you identify the reasons for your need for the extension. And also it indicates any request for an extension of maximum 18 months is given automatically. It's not discussed by the committee, it's a given. If you make your request within the deadline, it's for maximum period of 18 months, a member is automatically given that extension. Now, the committee comes into play, and according to the agreement, is required to consider the request when a request for an extension is greater than 18 months. And at that stage, the committee looks at it, and up to now, if the request meets the requirement of being made within the deadline and indicates the needs why, they have been approved. So for some members, it was a mix of goodwill towards assisting members to implement, which in the case of these requests meant additional time. And there was this view from members that if these requests that came outside of the deadline, if they were for a maximum of 18 months, then they did not even need to be considered by the committee. And so for some members, there was a sense that the deadline was of lesser importance than the fact that they were maximum 18 months and so would be automatically given. And so other members were, no, the letter, the spirit of the agreement, it's written there, it's in the sequence. The first thing that's required is adherence to this deadline. And so the committee discussed it, long, extensive discussions at their normal formal meeting. And then they held informal meetings. There were consultations. It went on for a while because it was important for members to have this clarity. And so after all these discussions, and because the basis of these discussions were these 6 requests that eventually were not approved, they discussed these over and back. There was no consensus on approving them. And it was clarified in the committee meeting, the clarification was sought by members and the chair confirmed as it is in the agreement. If a request for an extended implementation date is not approved, the member is required to implement that provision in accordance with the original implementation date. So that is a very important reminder for all members as to the importance of that deadline. And again, this will be, and again, I know those of you involved in your National Trade Facilitation Committee are more familiar with what this means on the ground than I would be. But it's just to emphasize that for you, to just be aware of upcoming implementation dates, checking where you are with your capacity to implement it, and if an Article 17 requirement is necessary, to be sure to adhere to the deadline. And here you'll see, just again to complete the picture, you can see there how many measures were covered in this, and you can see across the 6 members who had requests that were not approved, this related to 21 provisions that, according to the clarification in the committee, covered 21 provisions. So members were required to implement these provisions in accordance with their original implementation date. So moving on from that, we now come to this. And coming out of this extensive discussions about Article 17, and as I said, there is a huge goodwill in the committee to support all members to implement. They were trying to think, well, what can we do to help members avoid finding themselves in this situation of requiring additional implementation time, but not getting approval from the committee and actually being obliged to implement it from the original implementation date. And so one of these things is just a very practical, basic step that they thought they could take, is that the committee asked us here at the Secretariat every year at the beginning of each year to prepare a document that contained all members having provisions to be implemented within the next 2 years. So this latest one that came out December of last year, we are showing those members that have provisions to be implemented during all of 2022 and 2023. Also, for those of you familiar with our TFA database, you will know that each member has its own member profile page on that database. And front and center on the members page, you will see that it indicates there how many measures that country has to be implemented over the next 2 years. It's basically this information, but shown on each member's page. So that is where we are at in terms of the implementation. And these points that I've raised, the picture that you saw about implementation, the Article 17, the Article 19, the various flexibilities. We didn't cover the technical assistance needs, no? Yeah, normally that's okay. We have a graph just to complete the picture of the notifications of technical assistance needs on the database. Again, you can see the breakdown of what are the needs and in their order of importance of what members most need. So that might be of interest to you. So having gone through all of that, having reached the 4th year of implementation of the TFA, in accordance with the agreement, is under Article 26, I believe. 23. Is it 23.6? No?
23.16.
16. I knew there was a 6. Yes. So 23.16. The committee is required to undertake a review of implementation of the agreement after 4 years of its implementation. So this happened last year. So if we may, looking at, here was the setup to the review. There we are. The mandate is Article 23.16. That it shall review it from its 4 years into entry into force and periodically. So what the review did, it took stock of members' progress in implementing the agreement over the 4 years, and it looked at the implementation challenges encountered by members, and particularly least developed members. And there are, and again, you will know this yourselves, as well as the benefits from the implementation of the agreement and the implementation that has taken place so far. There are very real challenges, implementation challenges for members, and particularly for least developed members. And we have seen that through the need for TA and the number of provisions in yet to be implemented through Category C. And the review identified a number of means by which the committee can strengthen its work to support full implementation of the TFA. And the committee agreed that it would hold the next review 4 years on in 2026. Now, with regard to the process of this review and the engagement of the members, there was intensive work during last year with regards to it. You'll see it started at the beginning of the year and went all the way through until it was adopted on 26 November last. You'll see there the number of documentation and all of that type of work that went on. And finally, the report came up with 17 decisions and 5 recommendations for future work. Now, the next slide, and I'm almost at the end. Here are the significant review outcomes, and you'll see there you can find the review in that document GTFA 2. And the section 1, 2, 3 refer to the sections of the TFA. Now, under section 1, there's a decision that might seem a bit mundane, but in fact, it's very important because it relates to transparency. And transparency is part of the backbone of the TFA. And under those notifications that are required under a number of provisions to do with where information can be found on the internet, where inquiry points can be found, Those links are very important because that's where the information is to be found. And in some cases, which is very normal, 4 or 5 years on from when these links were notified, there have been changes in those links, updates perhaps by members, which has led to a number of these links, a significant number of links being out of date. And so the Secretariat now has to annually check each of the links and get in touch with members to fix those links. Under Section 2, which is the one with all the flexibilities, the one that I would draw your attention to, in fact, is that first recommendation. This is related to this gap that still exists with regard to what TA is required by members. And while that gap is there, there is a recommendation that members in requiring the technical assistance for their category Cs, that they organize meetings with donors in their capitals to review the situation with regard to their access to technical assistance. The other two, the decision and the other recommendation, are really about, are there better ways by which the committee can support members to make sure that if they need an extension, they make that request on time. Now, Section 3 is about the institutional arrangements and focus to a certain extent on agenda items. Again, the ones that are important there is members are now, these are decisions, have asked for members with overdue notifications or for us, I think, or for information to be shared at each meeting now with those notifications that are overdue, with the view, of course, to seeing what can be done to assist members to make those notifications. The second one, it's just as I said, it's in the same area. The third one that's of interest, and particularly for those of you in landlocked countries, perhaps, or countries in the transit corridors, so to speak, that there will be a dedicated session each year on transit issues for landlocked country members. Now, this was a strong request from countries, from members, least landlocked developing country members. And they have been bringing up issues that they have had with transit, because obviously they have even additional challenges. And one of the decisions that therefore came out of the review as a means of trying to assist these members is to have this dedicated session. And that session would be a mix of hearing about the challenges, but more importantly, trying to see what has been discussed is maybe if the committee would set an objective or more than one objective as to what they wanted to achieve over the course of the 4 years of this annual dedicated session, to try and reach some advancement for these countries to actually implement the TFA. The 4 years are there because the decision was that this annual session would happen each year up to the time of the next review, during which this session would be reviewed. And the last bullet point there is, and you will see this if you look at the review document, there were a number of proposals from members that did not reach consensus. But there is a possibility, the decision was made that members can continue to raise these proposals at committee meetings, and who knows, maybe make progress on them. And then looking at the future work, over the 4 years of the committee's work on the agreement, there has been a standing item on the agenda, which is experience sharing in general. And then a number of years ago, the issue of experience sharing by and about national trade facilitation committees, that also became a standing item in recognition of the importance of the vital role of the national committees in implementation of the TFA. And so coming out of those 4 years of experience sharing, the committee is going to put together a document highlighting the best practices for these committees based on what has been discussed in the committee over the 4 years. And the final output there is a very interesting one, and I think will be a very important one, which is to update a report that was carried out by the study carried out by the WTO under its annual World Trade Report series. This was done in 2015. It was on the anticipated benefits, the challenges of implementation of the TFA. Now, in that report were the statistics I referred to that showed the anticipated benefits of implementation of the agreement and the anticipated benefits for members across the board, with this indication that there would be greater benefits for the least developed countries. Now, during the review, the year of the review, from the beginning, least developed countries in particular were asking for an update of these figures. They had hoped for the review itself to be able to measure the actual impact of the agreement on the ground to see if all these anticipated benefits actually were being translated on the ground, and just to see what were the actual benefits. Now, as you can imagine, this would be a significant body of work that would require input from the WTO research division, and also from all the other organizations, the OECDs, the WCOs, World Bank, other bodies that have been involved with the implementation of the agreement and have been carrying out such measurements. So it not being possible to complete by the end of the review, instead the decision was made, and the request has been made to the WTO research division and has been agreed to, that the 2015 World Trade Report would be updated. And so that work has started in trying to measure the impact of the agreement. The request from the committee is that there would be a first report of the measurement to the spring committee meeting of 2023. So that will be, you know, in just over a year's time, that there will be a first, hopefully, set of figures that would indicate the actual benefits on the ground to members of the implementation of the TFA. And so that, I believe, brings me to the end of what I wanted to share with you. Very happy to answer questions that you have on all of our presentation so far. And we welcome any discussion. After our discussion then, Helen will outline what we have in mind for next Friday's session. Some exercises, there, an invitation to you to look further into some of the topics, particularly around the current implementation of the TFA. It's an invitation to you to explore that further through a number of questions and suggestions that we will be providing to you. So with that, I will wrap up where we are. Would you like to do first? Yes. Yeah. Is that what you'd like to do? Okay. So very happy if anybody has any questions, any comments. Certainly invite those of you who are involved in your own countries in the day-to-day implementation of the TFA, because you will be far better informed of the on-the-ground situation than Helen and I would be. So over to you.
You can feel free to take the floor if you'd like, or write your questions on the chat box, whichever feels more comfortable for you. Dolores, perhaps if you'd like to take, we have a question. It says, is the notification of definitive dates dependent on a technical assistance arrangement?
Now, according to the timeline, no. According to the agreement, the dates for notification of definitive dates are out there. Each member is to notify their definitive dates in accordance with that timeline. However, you have asked a very practical question, and the reality is that for a number of members, and this is certainly coming up to the August deadline for LDCs and their Category C definitive dates. Yes, the LDCs have raised during committee meetings that this exercise is quite onerous for them, and that they do need technical assistance to actually identify definitive dates for their Category C provisions. Now, just to give the background to that, during the period of the negotiations of the TFA, and knowing that self-designation was going to be the basis on which developing, least developed countries would implement the TFA, the members instigated and provided funding for a series of needs assessment for members that would be using the flexibilities. And that covered a wide number of members and a wide number of needs assessments. And this was where consultants or agencies, including the WTO, went to these capitals, worked with the stakeholders, particularly with the relevant ministries at the time, and worked with them to help them identify how they were going to categorize the provisions, first of all. And then there was, some work started on identifying dates. So there has been work done in this area. But the reality, as time goes on, is that, yes, to a long answer to your question, it's the agreement does not foresee that the notification of definitive dates is dependent on a TA arrangement. But the reality on the ground for a number of LDCs is, yes, they are requiring technical assistance to identify their definitive dates. Thank you.
We have another question. From what they can see, the implementation has moved on well, but there is a concern related to the support that can be given to NTFCs in establishing an organized and well-built organized secretariat.
Yes, indeed. Another very important point, and a situation that has been present from the implementation of the agreement. As you know, the establishment of the National Committee is not part of Section 2. The establishment of the National Committee is in Section 3 of the agreement, the institutional arrangements. And so there's no choice here or opportunity to decide when a member has the capacity or is ready to implement or to develop, I'm sorry, and establish their committee. It's required to be done from the time that they are implementing the agreement. Now, it is a very challenging situation. A number of members, and it's why it's in the agreement, that you can use an existing mechanism. And a number of countries, I don't know if it was the case for some of yourselves, already had a body in place that might have been overseeing, you know, various aspects of trade facilitation measures or other broader measures. That was a body that could then subsume overseeing the implementation of the TFA. And in other cases, and I think the majority of cases, it required a setting up from scratch of a national committee. Now, for some members, they seem to be up and running with their committee and have them in place and seem to be, you know, working well from the feedback. However, also for a number of members, this continues to be a challenge. What stakeholders are involved? Where is, in some cases, and again, you can give me better information, how will the Secretariat be resourced? Where will the Secretariat be housed? Where will the meetings be held? How will the chairs be selected? Will there be engagement by the private sector? How will the private sector be represented? And these continue to be challenges. There's no doubt about it. I know that UNCTAD has done and is doing a lot of work on supporting national trade facilitation committees. Now, if you're not familiar, you may already be familiar with their work or be engaging with them. If you're not, I would really suggest that you look at the UNCTAD website, and you will see there that they have publications on best practice. They have a more recent, what's the more recent one? A tracker. Is it? Yeah. What is that one, Helen?
So the UNCTAD has a very interesting National Trade Facilitation Committee database. And what they have there is certain indicators that would let you know, for example, if a committee is, let's say, well established, let's use that term, or I think that what they use, Dolores, is sustainable in time. So UNCTAD looks at various criteria and determines whether, for example, the National Trade Facilitation Committee is established by law. It looks at whether, you know, it has a rotating presidency, whether it involves the private sector, etc. So it looks at different aspects of trade facilitation committees, national trade facilitation committees, and it makes an assessment of whether that committee is sustainable in time. So it would be very interesting to look at what UNCTAD, for example, evaluates, and where does your National Trade Facilitation Committee stand. This database, from our work with them, what we've heard is, you know, it feeds from the information that is provided from the domestic authorities. So it benefits from you. If you answer the questionnaires, if you provide information, then they're able to process it and put it in a database that it's accessible to everyone. So they have very interesting work. If not, you know, a hands-on situation with the database, it does provide very interesting information that you can take from to apply to your NTFC.
Sure. And again, just to cut to the chase, there are, you know, donors and technical assistance supporters out there. So this could definitely be something that you reach out to potential donors about and seek aid in the establishment of it, because as everyone recognizes, it is the vital piece of the jigsaw for implementation of the TFA in any given country, because it's the body that brings the stakeholders together. It's the body that can coordinate between customs, other border agencies, ministries, SPS, TBT, all of the elements that are covered in the TFA. And so it is extremely important. And again, from what we hear, and I don't know if this is something that you're experiencing yourselves, you know, there is what you would consider the very normal situation of agencies perhaps finding it difficult within the committee to make that coordination, because different agencies would feel ownership over certain aspects. And that in itself takes a lot of work. So in my personal view, my suggestion would be, if you need practical support, there is all this UNCTAD work that's out there. The World Customs Organization has done work on the National Committee. So I would look there first to see if there are lessons you can take from it, etc. And otherwise, or in parallel, also reach out and see what kind of assistance could be out there for you to support your national committee. I see here why risk management is relative. Would you like to take that one, Helen, as you—
Sure, I can have a head start on this, and please do feel free to complement anything, Dolores. But basically the idea is this: physical inspections at customs, they take time, they take money. So traders try to avoid them as much as possible, of course. But again, if you put yourself in the position of a customs office, you need to make sure that there are no illicit goods, to say the least. So basically, on Article 7.4 of the TFA, what it requires, to the extent possible, is that you have a risk management system. What does this entail? Basically, it entails that based on certain criteria, you build risk profiles for traders, and then you identify those for traders or shipments, and you identify those that have a higher risk. So those that have a higher risk, then you focus your control on those, and those traders that you have a good experience with, that have, you know, no red flags in your system according to your criteria, then those you sort of put on a green lane, let's say. So the idea is that avoid physical inspections as much as possible, identify and focus on those shipments or traders that have a high risk profile, and do that in a manner that is objective. So also the TFA, what it requires is that when you have a risk management system, that you don't use it to discriminate against certain, you know, either traders or shipments, goods, etc., but rather that you do it objectively. And for example, you can use criteria such as of course, the HS code, the nature and description of the goods, the country of origin, the country from which the goods were shipped, the value of the goods, the compliance record of traders, and the type of means of transport. And this is only, these are only examples of criteria that you may use, but that is the overall concept of risk management. Dolores, if you'd like to add anything to that.
Sure, thanks, Helen. That pretty much covers it. As Helen was saying, with the risk management, it's really as well about the customs experience with traders. If they're, you know, have been dealing with the trader that have, you know, maybe falsified invoices with regard to value, with regard to content of the container, in terms of really just maybe trying to avoid duties or reducing the duties, that is a basis as well for customs to know where, as Helen said, where there will be red flags. And one of the issues, as you probably know, that's you know, really supporting the benefit. Obviously, at the end of the day, that trade facilitating aspect of risk management is it speeds up crossing the border. At the end of the day, that's what risk management is about. Your shipment is not held up at the border for days waiting for a physical inspection inspection from customs or SBS people or TBT people that might have very few resources on the ground, depending on which customs office you're arriving at. And so that's the trade facilitating aspect. Now, as we've seen, and it has really been moved forward during the pandemic, is the increase in online trading and the increase in business to consumer. If we think of how many times we go on Amazon or what it is that we're purchasing, there is this move to smaller consignments. Back in the day when you would have big consignments by an importing company, etc., customs would, this is what they would be mostly dealing with. Now, if you're looking more at, I've seen the word used, parcelization, so you're looking at much smaller consignments, and that you can imagine the time that this would now be requiring of customs, etc., to go and look through these, and they're not. That's not going to really be something that would be done. And here you'd be looking at things like minimum values, a value below which customs will not be looking at it for revenue. And so risk management program is becoming, always has been, but is becoming more and more important. And associated as part of the risk management program, there's also a provision in the agreement to establish what's called an authorized economic operator program. And this is the other side of the coin of the risk management program. In addition to identifying perhaps traders that you've become aware of, or a particular type of product that you need that, are throwing up red flags, you also know your operator that is very compliant, that you've never as customs or any agency had problems with. And so if they are meeting certain criteria, they are recognized as authorized economic operators, and they get green channels through the customs. Again, all about, at the end of the day, and I've heard somebody refer to the TFA as like a common sense agreement. It literally is about how to facilitate trade, speed up the time, reduce the costs to encourage greater cross-border trading. As part also of the risk management, or another follow-up, for those who are not authorized, well, even authorized economic operators or the other traders that you're allowing through the green channel at customs, you still have to ensure that these are continuing to be compliant. And this is the provision in the TFA to establish post-clearance audit. And this is really the aspect that Helen touched on in her overview, to speed up, to sort of de-link having all the information that you require by customs, so that you know all the fees, guarantees, everything that you need to get before you feel you can release the good from customs. The post-clearance audit is part of facilitating this, because if you have a post-clearance audit in place, you will then be able to, over a period of time, a year, whatever, you can carry out checks on traders to evaluate that they are in order with their customs duties, with all the requirements of customs. And if you then, through the post-clearance audit, there are then penalties if you are found to be non-compliant. And for those traders that have been granted authorized economic operator status, they face even greater penalties if they are found through a post-clearance audit to be non-compliant. Helen has just told me there are 5 minutes left. I'm talking far too much. I'm sorry in response. And I'm just seeing for other questions, Helen, sorry, where are we? And I'll go a lot more faster. Yes, the members can revise their notifications exactly as we had said, through the shifting, through requesting an extension of time. And as I said, just to adhere to the requirements in the agreement. Absolutely, developed countries, they've been implementing the agreement from 22 February 2017. They don't have the flexibilities, the implementation flexibilities. However, I will just like to say, when you look through the agreement, the first section, which is actually the body of the technical aspect of the agreement, you will notice the language in there contains flexibilities that apply across the board for developed countries and least developed countries. So you will see there must implement to what's the wording, Helen? As appropriate as possible.
To the extent possible.
That's the word, because some of them can depend on your domestic rules and regulations. So all the members can avail of the flexibilities contained in the 12 articles of the agreement, but developed countries do not have access to implementation flexibilities. The shifting, can you give where a member shifts from C to B? Yeah, it's simply, and some members have shared this with the members. Say, for example, Article 1, let's say notifying an inquiry point, and some members need technical assistance maybe to establish the inquiry point, or have indicated that they need this technical assistance to implement it. And then they will discover as they're going along, no, they don't need the technical assistance. They have the necessary resources themselves. So they say, okay, we are moving this out of C into B. They don't have to. A member can choose to stay in C. They still have the flexibility of having technical assistance, but some members are able to expedite the implementation and wish to, you know, if you have it, if you are implementing it, then it's all to your credit that this is the case. And it's important for the committee to know this, because they now know, and everyone knows, that you are now implementing this provision. Any platforms, international or donors that provide? Yes, there is, well, there are many websites, but one that we house here is, it's WTO. It's the Trade Facilitation Agreement Facility. In fact, this is something we should talk about on Friday, Helen. Sure. And if you check out that facility website, so yeah, Helen is great. She's putting up the link there, because that the function of one of the functions of this facility, and we go into it more on Friday, is to actually perform as a matchmaker between those looking for assistance and all the donors out there. So if as a first step you go to that website, I believe that that would give you some useful information even. Any other questions, Helen?
I believe we have reached the end of the questions. So thank you everyone for your participation and your questions, and thank you Dolores for those very insightful answers. We have 10 more minutes, and I just wanted to go over the exercise with you. Just
oh, and there was a question there, Helen.
Yes, there was a question on the exercise, whether you had to provide the answers in writing and send it to us. The answer is no. The idea is that we have a discussion on Friday. I will have the database website on screen and be walking through the exercise. But the idea is that, for example, if you notice something that catches your attention, perhaps you'd like to discuss with the rest of the group, take the floor and discuss, or you can do it through the chat box. I might think of using Mentimeter, if any one of you have used it before, just to sort of gather some of your answers. But I think that time permitting, this would be an exercise that is best in a discussion with you. So I'm going to explain the questions just so that there are no doubts. However, I will type our email addresses, Dolores, in the chat box in case you have any questions during this period between now and Friday, certainly about the exercise or anything else TFA related that we might assist you with, so that you can reach out to us. So basically, you have to go to the Trade Facilitation Database website. That there is the link. And then you have to select your customs territory, your WTO member, right? From the WTO members tab. And the first question is, when you go to, that will give you a profile from that, from your country, from your region, or your customs territory as it applies. And it will give you a profile. So there, in the profile, you would have to find what is the current rate of implementation commitments. Then, if a provision or if a group of provisions has been notified in category C, what is the type of technical assistance that has been most notified as being required, for example? If provisions have been notified under category C, has a notification been made on the arrangements or progress for technical assistance? And if you'd like more information on this, you can take a look at Article 16 of the TFA regarding this notification requirement. In line with the decision from the first review of the TFA to hold meetings in capital with donors to review progress on technical assistance, who would you contact in case your country needs technical assistance? Would this meeting be to arrange technical assistance, or would it be to review progress on technical assistance? How would you find their contact points? And what information or notifications would assist you in preparing for such meetings? Now, this question might, force you to navigate outside your member profile, but all of the information, the hint is in the TFA database website. Please, Dolores.
Sorry, if I just may interject, Helen, for 1 second here. Question 6, I'm just thinking as I look at it, for those of you involved in your national facilitation committees, perhaps you will be in a position to share with us if you have found yourself. Perhaps these are things you have already done. And if that's the case, I think it would be really interesting to hear from you. And I think of assistance to other participants who may be in a position where they have to do this. Sorry, Helen.
No, of course. Thank you, Dolores. And that reminds me, I might make a pause here. If any of you who work in TFA implementation, who are in the NTFCs, would like to share something with the rest of the group for 3 minutes, let's say on Friday, regarding your experience implementing, that'd be great, just in general. But of course, if you wanted to do it in line with these questions, of course, Dolores, it'd be amazing to hear from you. So just reach out to me, those of you who would like to participate. Perhaps we can organize something between here and Friday. Nothing more than 2-3 minutes if you'd like, no presentations required, just basically to hear from your experience. And then going to question 7, has your country, region, or customs territory triggered Articles 17 or 19 of the TFA? These are the early warning mechanism and the shifting of categories. Was the request for an extension under Article 17 approved by the committee? And in case it wasn't, why do you think that was? Then if you open the document GTFA M1 Rev 1, the link is here on the document to check for the upcoming implementation dates for your WTO member. So go to that document, look for the WTO member that you are looking at the profile. And so if you were to consider that the application of Article 17 or 19 of the TFA could be appropriate, what are the deadlines that you should keep in mind to submit a notification to the committee and comply with the procedural requirements? So basically, go to that document, look at the definitive implementation dates, look at the requirements in Articles 17 and 19, and find out what the date would be in case you needed to trigger one of these articles, because this is the purpose of this document. And if you're in an NTFC and you might be considering triggering these articles, it might be useful information for you. Then how has your WTO member categorized the obligations for transparency notifications? This is the notifications for Articles 1.4, 10.4.3, 10.6.2, and 10.2.2. You will see them in the member profile. So what is the category that has been assigned to each one of those provisions? Have the notifications been submitted accordingly? So this is a mix of things, right? So what is the category that that provision was notified in, and has the information associated with that commitment been submitted to the committee? Now then, you may open one of those notifications, especially that under Article 1.4, and check if the links work. Do they lead you to the appropriate information? Do they lead you to accurate information? Is it up to date? For example, you can look at that. Then, if you were a member of the private sector and you want to participate in your National Trade Facilitation Committee, how would you go about contacting them? Who would you contact? And do you think that perhaps this information is relevant to others that are not the private sectors? Who could be those stakeholders that might be interested in this information? Yes, Dolores, please.
Once again, just to say, for those of you on National Trade Facilitation Committees, you would be very familiar with this. And again, it would be interesting if ever you wanted to share with us how you did actually, or how the private sector has been involved and how it continues to be involved. So, sorry, thanks, Helen.
No, thank you, Dolores. And then lastly, has your WTO member, I'm using that to abbreviate a little, have you shared any experience with the committee on the implementation of the TFA? Do you think that there are any relevant projects that you might be interested in sharing with the committee? Or on the opposite side, are you interested in hearing from the experience of other members in implementing, a particular aspect of the TFA? For those of you who might not be familiar with the Trade Facilitation Committee, there is a dedicated part in the agenda of every committee where members share experience. So this is related to that, where members, share a little bit of what projects they have been working on, whether they have been successful. And members are also free to, for example, say, we are interested in hearing from members how they have implemented a certain provisions because they want some examples. And also this information is all in the database. All of the information required to answer these questions is in the database. Again, no need to send it in writing to us, certainly not. But I do expect that we can have an interactive session on Friday. If you don't answer any of these questions, it'll be absolutely boring. So again, take Dolores' encouragement, and I hope that, those from NTFCs, but also all of you participate and just, we have a good discussion on Friday, and that would be it from my side.
Thanks a million, Helen. And as you can see, this is not at all, a pressurized situation. As we said, it really is just for those of you interested in looking further into the TFA. We just thought that these questions might be things that would trigger your interest or might give you a guidance for going through the database. It's hard if you go onto a database and there's so much information and you're there clicking. I know for me, I just get lost and things like that. So we were hoping that these type of questions focused on your own country, region, or customs territory, that this might be a means by which you would become more familiar with the status of implementation of the TFA in your own territory. and also help you maybe navigate through the database, because it contains any information we have received from members. It's in the database. And just before finishing on that, just on a point of interest, and it certainly was new to me and of interest, Helen and I have spoken recently to, well, at least for me, it was the first regional trade facilitation committee. It's in the ECOWAS region. That's what the ECOWAS economic community, isn't it, of Western Africa? Maybe Alicia, you know, I've forgotten what ECOWAS is. It's the an African region, economic region, and they actually launched and had their first meeting of a regional trade facilitation committee yesterday. And so maybe that's something that you'd like to reflect on, whether there are any moves towards that in your region, or how you could see that working, what the benefits could be, seeing as, you know, a trade facilitation agreement. It's different in the sense that you cannot implement provisions of the TFA just for some other members, you know? You can't say, okay, member A, B, C, you can look at our inquiry points on the internet, but the rest of you can't, you know? So this is an agreement that's for everyone, and there is encouragement in the agreement to look at things on a regional basis, because requesting or achieving technical assistance on a regional basis can make sense, particularly if you're looking at infrastructure, physical aspects. So anyway, not to go on, but just to share that with you. As I said, it was new for me. I think it's very, very interesting, and it will be interesting to see how that develops. So thank you very much. It's the Economic Community of West African States. Thank you, and my apologies. It's my old age. I just don't have a memory anymore. So I think with that, we really will stop talking now. And thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for your attention. And we look forward to seeing you and chatting with you further on Friday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dolores and Helen. And I just wonder, because regarding the exercise, we have participants from exceeding governments. So as observers, presumably they don't notify and they're not included in the database, but you correct me if I'm wrong. If that is the case, should they just choose any member or a preferred trading partner that they would like to go over the questions that you elaborated for the exercise to allow them to try all of the functions and try all of these questions, so that maybe it will bring to their mind some queries that will be good to explore during the Friday afternoon. If you let us know, or if anybody else is encountering any information that they don't find for the country, should they just out of interest try to look for somebody else and try to see if this would raise any questions that they would be willing and would like to raise during the Friday session. Let us know, Helen.
That's a very, no, just say, Alicia, that's an excellent point. And yes, indeed, absolutely. For those who are interested, choose a preferred trading partner, and if they would like to go through that exercise.
Very good. So this concludes our session today. We invite you to connect again, the same link on Friday, using the same link. The session we reserve 2 hours, so will run from 14 hours to 16 hours Central Eastern Time. That is 2 to 4 p.m. Geneva time. And we hope that you would come prepared and utilize this time. And it looks like it's going to be very interactive and very practical. So we will learn everything we need to know about how to use this beautiful tool, which I think can give us a lot of information that one can use for briefing notes or meetings with stakeholders, and utilize this information, since the graphs and information is very nicely displayed. Thanks again for the clear presentations today. And we will post the video of today's session, and we will provide you with the link as soon as we have it. So for those who wish to review it in the coming days, you'll be also able to watch this video that we have just recorded. So with that, I think if there's no other questions, comments.
Just a quick one.
We are over the time, so we have perhaps a time for a very quick question, because we are already over the time. So please ask the questions, and after that we'll close the session. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's just personal, because maybe because I came in today. I'm just asking about the evaluation. When it is done, is it on Monday or on Friday?
The evaluation we will be sending to you by email. Sometimes we'll send it on Friday. This time, for example, because we wanted to see and receive the answers to the questions that were posed. So we will be shortly sending the evaluations along with the compilation of answers that were received to the questions for session 1, for module 1. So this time it was more convenient for us to be sending the evaluation for module 1 today. But if we finish all of the sessions on a given week on a Friday, I think we will be sending the evaluations for the given week on Friday, end of day. Did it answer your question?
I've got the answer. It's okay, I've got the answer.
Yes, you've asked about the evaluations, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, very good. So thank you very much to you all. Have a nice day, afternoon, evening, and we connect again and see you again on Friday.